Illegal immigrants are an issue most first world countries will face. In Australia, a water border makes it harder for illegal immigrants to arrive, but it is still an issue. Facing an influx of asylum seekers, in 2013, the then government introduced Operation Sovereign Borders.
The crisis on our borders has become a national emergency. We've had almost 50,000 illegal arrivals by boat. We've had almost 800 illegal boats. We've had 1,000 or more deaths at sea. We've had $10 billion plus in border protection blowouts. The problem is getting worse. This government can't solve it. We are announcing today that under a coalition government, we will swiftly implement Operation Sovereign Borders.
The coalition government had introduced the policy, but in 2023, under a Labor government, the policy remains in place.
As Australia's Home Affairs Minister, I have a warning to people smugglers and anyone seeking to undermine Australia's tough border protection policies. You will fail. Every person who has tried to come by boat has been returned, and you will be too. The Australian Defence Force and the Australian Border Force watch and patrol our borders all day, every day. Make no mistake, Australia's strong border protection policies remain. If you try to make it to Australia by boat, you will end up back where you started, having given your life savings to a people smuggler. You will never settle in Australia.
It is a tough policy that hasn't been without criticism, but the bipartisan support has meant that in Australia it has been effective. In Australia, we do have a bipartisan approach to our border. Mind you, we have water surrounding Australia, so it is a lot easier to handle. But do you think the situation would be helped if both sides of Congress came together and fixed it together?
Well, I think both sides of Congress should come together if they're being truthful with themselves and acknowledge what a threat this is to the national and homeland security of the United States. I think to try and speak about it in any other way is disingenuous. This is truly a threat. The power that the cartels now have based on the billions and billions of dollars that they've been able to make off of the human and sex trafficking and the drugs because of the policies of this administration are readily apparent and evident. So I think Congress should come and work together. I would encourage that, recognize it for what the crisis is, the threat to our national security, and implement the solutions that were working under the previous administration and administrations before. This is not a former President Trump issue. I understand why this current administration wanted to isolate itself from those positions because they're a different party. I get it, but you cannot put the politics over the national security of the country. And unfortunately, that's what this administration has done time and time again. So they need to implement programs that work, and they need to recognize that their strategy or lack thereof is not working.
With Title 42 due to expire, there is major concerns of where the border crisis is heading.
What's different is what's coming across here. It's controlled, but it's not controlled by the Mexican government. It's not controlled by the American government. It's controlled by the cartel. The individuals who cross illegally on this border in this region come in camouflaged outfits. The Sinaloa cartel controls who comes across and the amount of drugs that come across. This is a fundamental problem. But it's the problem that's created by this administration. We've only been in the majority for 2 months. The freshman member that I brought here, they have done more in 4 weeks of looking at the border than the president has done in 40 years. The administration, on the day President Biden was sworn in, when you look at the gaps in the wall, why are they there? Why are these lights wired but not working? Because we got a new president that said to stop it. We paid for the metal to go up, but it's stored far away. There's gaps that allow it to come in. That's wrong.
There seems to be no proper big policy in place. There's certainly nothing from a bipartisan level. Where do you see this heading, or what main things do you think the Biden administration needs to put in place starting now so that by 2024, even if he doesn't run, if there's another Democratic contender, what would get voters over the line when it comes to immigration?
Yeah, number one, asylum. The asylum system in the United States of America needs to be dramatically reformed so that it cannot be exploited. And so that you don't get to come into the country in such large numbers and basically hang out because we're so backlogged. And as your asylum case pens for sometimes years, you could disappear into the shadows of a sanctuary city and just hope, like all of those DACA recipients, someday that there's a congressional measure to give you amnesty, which a lot of those things are on the table and might be part of a bipartisan immigration negotiation. And so the people who took that route would have been correct, assuming that someday the amnesty would very much be on the table for them. So the asylum policy, first and foremost, needs to be tightened, needs to be more clear, and you need to have some remain in Mexico policy that is being actually enforced and being enforced, as a category, categorically on all of the people who qualify for enforcement. So that means you need the cooperation of Mexico. It means you need the cooperation of other places in Central America. But if people are coming through Mexico and they want to make an asylum case in the United States, really one of the most effective ways, we actually saw this under the Trump administration, to do that is some form of remain in Mexico so that people can't just come into the U.S. and then never show up for their asylum hearing or whatever else because they're able to make money under the table and be with family when they're here in the U.S. I think part of it also is having a conversation about what's humane in a clearer way, because frankly, the Biden administration's ultra-liberal policies on immigration are not humane, specifically because they're what brings so many people to line the pockets of cartel to make these trips that end up in rape and kidnapping, in some cases death, and actually many cases death. That's another thing the media doesn't like to cover, is how many bodies are recovered on these pathways, how many bodies are recovered near the American border. There is a lot of death. And so those policies that draw people, these kind of pull factor policies as they're called, those are not, frankly, they're not humane. And so I think part of it is just having the conversation and finding a way for Democrats to start thinking about this in that way. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Republicans, sometimes they'll not talk about this with the humanitarian lens that it deserves, because when you talk to these people, the women and the children, the parents, they just have incredible stories. They want so badly to be in the United States of America, which we've always thought of as the land of opportunity. So I do think you need to combine both of those realities when you're looking at these policies. But at the same time, I also think one thing the American media and American Democrats miss is that it's frankly not humane to enforce this kind of open border, de facto open border, because it's great for cartels who have just created a monopoly on human trafficking in Mexico.